Dear students, welcome to the CEO Leadership Series. My name is Cheng Wang Li, and it is an indescribable pleasure for me to present to you Mr. Sanjiv Lamba, the CEO and Chairman of Linde, and one of the most important and successful top managers of the global chemical industry. Linde is the largest industrial gases and engineering company in the world. It was founded almost 150 years ago on Thursday, June 12, 1879, and today has more than 65,000 employees worldwide that in the last year have generated revenues of almost 34 billion US dollars. In addition, the company is also one of the most prestigious firms in the world and is a Fortune Global 500 company, a Forbes Global 2000 company, a component of the Standard & Poor's or S&P 500 index, and a component of the Nasdaq 100 index. Furthermore, the firm is listed as one of the most sustainable firms in the world by Dow Jones for 23 years in a row, as one of the most ethical firms for 6 years in a row, and has been named by Fortune magazine as one of the world's most admired companies. Mr. Sanjiv Lamba has been CEO of Linde since Tuesday, March 1st, 2022, and has also been chairman of the firm since Saturday, January 31st, 2026. Mr. Lamba initially obtained a Bachelor of Commerce degree with honors from St. Xavier's College at the University of Calcutta in India, and also qualified as a chartered accountant. He started his career at BOC in India in finance and rose through the ranks. He became director of finance of the firm and then managing director of BOC India. After the company was acquired by Linde, Mr. Lamba held different roles at Linde and was, among others, the head of the South and East Asia Regional Business Unit. He then joined the Executive Management Board, the Vorstand of Linde, and among others was the Chief Operating Officer or CEO of the firm. And in 2022, Mr. Lamba, as I mentioned before, became CEO of the firm, and in 2026, Chairman of the company. Now, it is an indescribable pleasure for me to present to you Mr. Sanjiv Lamba because of, as I mentioned, his tremendous success, renown, and reputation. And he really represents what success is all about and someone whom you can learn from to become successful. So much so that, in fact, indeed, he and his company at one point have almost, quote unquote, suffered a bit from success, because whereas most companies have been trying to get into the top indices in the world, such as the S&P 500 and the German, DAX 40 index, after Mr. Lamba has become CEO, the market value of the company increased so much, and the share price by now has increased by 80% or almost doubled, that it hit a certain cap at the DAX, which does not allow one single firm to dominate it and become more successful than 10% of the entire index, so that Linde and Mr. Lamba have decided to voluntarily remove themselves from the index, whereas every other firm is trying to get into the index. And I think we can have more than just one or two things to learn from him about his leadership, about his life. We're very, very happy that you're here. Thus, please help me and very warmly welcome Mr. Sanjiv Lamba.
Professor Lee, all I was going to say is thank you so much for your very generous words. I'm delighted to be here. I hope that the time we have together, we'll get a chance to have a real conversation. He has been overly generous, so take everything he said with a pinch of salt. We are a very successful organization, that's true. It's not because of me, it's because of 65,000 people who do a phenomenal job at Linde every day. And I'll talk to you more about that.
Well, thank you very much for a very kind response and also very humble words. As I mentioned, it's a great pleasure to have you here, and we would like to get to know you maybe first as a person, and then learn about your leadership experiences. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe even starting with your youth, childhood, and school years?
Sure. So born and brought up in Calcutta in India, in an army family, and really the story goes, my vision and my dream when I was a kid was to be an Air Force pilot, which was what my brother, one of my brothers was. And for me, he was really my hero. And unfortunately, I was 14. I got a pair of glasses and realized my dreams had been shot down. So I wasn't going to take off in an Air Force aircraft. But thought about all my options at that point in time and decided finance might be something that I'd be interested in, and went down that path. And over time, I've gotten to realize that there are many things good about finance. There are some things a little bit boring about finance, but we could talk about that. What I really found passion in was business. So I took the analytics and took the learnings that came out of finance and said, well, how do I apply this to being part of a very successful organization and apply my skills to making that business even more successful? And I think Albert Einstein said something that I took to heart, which is strive not for success, but for creating value. And in my mind, my life journey is all about, how we've created value. Now, along that path, a couple of things happen, and I'll try and be a little bit brief so that we have enough time for more questions. But I joined a company which was then known as Indian Oxygen, part of the BOC or British Oxygen Group, which later on became part of Linde AG, and then finally Linde PLC as we stand today. I joined it at the bottom. One of my claims to fame in those days, Professor Lee, was that I was the first person who learned how to fax our reports to the UK in the company. So I was always willing to take initiative. I was happy to own things that made sense and I felt I could do something about, and I was always happy to learn, and I learned new things all along the way, and that has been a theme of my life. We'll talk about any suggestions I may have for you, and one of those would be think about how you learn, but more about that later. In my journey, I then went to the UK and spent some time in the UK. I was seconded there, and I think really that was an inflection point for me, and I suddenly realized the world was much bigger than I thought it was, and that you could do so much more. And I did well and went back to India, did a bigger role, took over the company, and there are some good learnings that came out of that particular situation and time as well. And then I moved on and did other roles to get me to here. In the journey, an equally important part, which we normally tend to not talk about as professionals, is the fact that I got married to my wife, who I dated for 7 years, and then she said yes. So it took a while to convince her, but I was a finance guy. What do you expect, right? So, but she agreed, and we've been married for 35 years next year. So I think that's a pretty big milestone. 37 years with the company and 35 years with the wife. I think that's a pretty good, I think it's okay. Yeah. 3 kids along the way, and they're brilliant kids. Very tough, very demanding, a little bit like you folks who are going to ask me all kinds of difficult questions. So along that journey, I have had a journey at the personal level, which has been enormously fulfilling. And I think finding the balance between those two, probably the biggest challenge in life, I would say. Typically, I challenge myself to be at the heart of our business and be with the people and be with our customers. In my mind, a leader has to be visible, present, and out there, willing to take on both challenges, identify opportunities, and make sure that people in the organization are seen. And in many ways, as we talk about leadership, we'll get to that point. But I think I'll stop there in terms of a rather comprehensive introduction.
All right. Well, thank you for walking us through some of your milestones and also personal milestones, and congratulations. You mentioned, so let me follow up with a few questions. You mentioned,
Sure.
For example, some of the skills you learned in finance that perhaps you can still apply today, and also your time as a student. I mean, can you elaborate a little bit? I mean, were you early on a very good student already, or did that come over time? And do you have some advice for our young students here?
Yeah. So I'd say a few things. My educational journey was a little bit different in the sense that I went to a Jesuit school, so I had some really great foundations, and I had priests who were very passionate about teaching children. So I had really an enormous benefit. So when I go to the UK, I tell them that I speak better English than them because I learned the Queen's English, and I don't know what they learned, but so I can pull their leg a little bit. I have good friends in England. But that grounding was super important. But even more important was the fact that I made some choices along the way. One of the strange choices I made was I stayed at home while I did university, which is, when my kids talk to me about that, they say that is very strange. But it worked well because my university started at 6 a.m. in the morning and I finished at 9:40. And then at 10 o'clock, I started my articleship, which is training to be a chartered accountant, which finished at 5 p.m. So it was a full day. It was a tough day. I enjoyed it, I have to be honest. But when you start at 6 a.m., yeah, it's an interesting way to think about university. So I think that I think was one of the choices I made, that I wanted to fast track my career. I was in a hurry. I was then in a hurry, and people tell me I remain impatient today. So I'm always trying to think about what more can be done. How can we be more productive? And that's a theme that Linde embraces as well. As we talk a bit more about the company, I'll tell you. I was a reasonably good student. I was a smart student who didn't work very hard. There are many smart people in this room, so I know you work very hard as well. That is good. Do that. Both of those combinations work well. But there are three things I'd say to you in life that have worked well for me while in getting educated, and even when learning. I think I'd say to you one of the biggest learning phases of my life has been in my career with Linde. This is where I've actually learned real life leadership. I have to say with some disappointment that I don't think I learned leadership or real life problem solving in my university days, or even as I was getting trained as a chartered accountant. All of that happened when I learned, when I started off with Linde. So there are some leadership lessons that came out of that. I'll give you a couple of things that I think I've held on to. You will already have heard that in the introduction, but I think they're important for me, and something that I want to share with you, because and I think it's something that I would ask you to challenge yourself on and then decide whether it makes sense or not. The first point is initiative, making choices in your life. You made a choice to be here this afternoon, right? Hopefully that'll prove to be a worthwhile investment. We'll see. But making choices and taking initiative creates value in life. And if that's what you want to do, I would encourage you to make sure you do that. Default is not a good option. Just following people, doing what everybody else is doing, isn't necessarily a good option. Sometimes it can be. I'm not saying it's not, it's not, you rule it out. But I am saying, though, that you make an active choice and you take the initiative when you make that choice. So for me, that would be one of the life lessons that has held well for me. I always took the initiative. I ran a theater club when I was in college. So I was starting at 6 a.m., finishing at 5, and then from 5 to 7:30, we would have our rehearsals. So we would put on amateur plays and enjoy life. I mean, you can work only so much, right? You've got to have a little bit of fun in life. And that's how I met my wife. So I tell you that story only because I took the initiative to set up a theater club, which resulted in me getting a wife of 35 years next year. So kind of looked okay, in the end. But that initiative mattered. And the initiative is what has led me to do a number of things in life. And, being here is one of them. When Professor Lee wrote to me, originally, I was a little bit hesitant. I live in the US now, and I travel enough. I travel 22 days a month. So, another day away from the family, I was kind of wondering, really, is it worth it? And then I said, well, there are going to be these bright kids who are going to have a vision for the future, and maybe it's a great idea that I will learn something. So I'm here today, not because I'm going to share things I will share things with you, but I'm here today because this is an opportunity for me to learn from you. And I think that's the second point I want to leave you with. Take initiative, learn, and then take ownership. That, for me, is the formula for success.
Oh, very much appreciate that you are here and sharing your knowledge and perhaps collecting something from us as well. Mr. Lamba, when you started out at BOC,
Yeah.
I mean, you probably did not have all the leadership principles in place at that time.
Correct.
What were some of the tasks you did that you perhaps still benefit from today? And how did it, kind of your perspective change from doing your own job to starting to lead smaller teams and then larger and larger teams?
That's a great question. So the way I would explain it to you, and I said, life lessons were learned in BOC, and BOC and then Linde. So I kind of think about that as my journey with Linde. And there were many tasks that happened over there. And I think the application of initiative, ownership, and learning is in some ways embodied in many of those life lessons that I took on. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I trained in finance, which meant that I had a lot of knowledge, or I accumulated knowledge, at least book knowledge, in terms of looking at information, interpreting information, and then drawing conclusions, right? So you kind of create finance in many ways gives you the analytics that you need to look at a situation and say, well, what do I do in this particular situation? But it was knowledge that I didn't know how to apply. It was knowledge that looked, felt good when you read a book, but in the end, when you walked into that office the first day, you had no clue what you were going to do. So the story goes, there was this individual who used to do a cost sheet for the products that the company manufactured. It was all manual at that point in time. And there would be a long sheet with multiple columns, and manually you would allocate costs to each product. Now, this is 1989. Computers were around, right? I mean, I was using Lotus 1 to 3 at that point in time. Now, most of you wouldn't have seen a floppy drive, which was 8 inches. I don't know if you know what a floppy drive is, but if you look it up in a museum, you will see that there used to be a floppy drive on which you would write not just the code, but the program that you had put together. So I volunteered. Again, I took the initiative to go out and tell this individual that I was willing to set up an Excel or a Lotus 1 to 3 program at that point to do all the allocation. The cost allocation is a simple method. I mean, it's not rocket science, right? One of the life lessons I got out of that incident was that the union turned up and said that I was trying to automate the work of a human being, and therefore that was not considered appropriate, and that I should not be allowed to do that. And I got chastised by the union and so on and so forth. That was the beginnings of my learnings of working with unions, and I have had an exciting relationship with them for most of my life now. But I learned 2 things from that. One, people have responsibility for tasks that they own and they take pride in, right? I felt that I could take that task away from that individual and automate it, and it'd be good for the organization, which it would be. And ultimately, 2 years down the road, after having worked at convincing the union and everybody else that this was a good thing for the organization, I did manage to do that. The life lesson here was engagement with people in whatever activities you undertake is crucial. Understanding their point of view is crucial. I went in with great intent. I went in with passion to go and do something that'd be good for the organization, not recognizing the fragility of the human balance that sits in organizations. And a key learning for me from that point, and which I think I have been pretty good at being self-aware and recognizing in things that happen within the organization, is understanding how people interact and how do you make sure you engage people within organizations to achieve the goals that you set for yourself, which means you have a lot of influencing that happens. And that has to be, it's a leadership quality that I think will hold good for all of you, both in your professional lives, but also in your personal lives, to make sure that you are able to influence people to work with you, collaborate, and actually achieve a purpose that you set as a goal for yourself. The other thing I learned was the importance of learning. Today, when I do sessions like this within our organization, I tell new graduates coming on, the day you stop learning, you're dead, right? Now, you are in a remarkable environment where learning is thriving, right? You are right now, you're like sponges absorbing everything that is happening around the world. Now, you might find some of the conversations here boring, but you're nonetheless absorbing that, and you will determine what is exciting and necessary and useful for you. And some things may not be necessary or useful, and you will put that aside. But you are absorbing and processing a huge amount of input that you're getting from this conversation, but from the faculty you have around, from your peers that you're constantly conversing with, from social media, from every other platform. And of course, some of you may be working with AI, and therefore you'll be testing AI and seeing how that whole evolution happens. The life learning for me over there was the day you stop learning, you're dead. It essentially, every living day that you have, don't waste the opportunity, make sure you learn. And I think that's been a principle that I've held to, and I challenge myself to setting aside learning time every year, even now, which is a challenge, I have to be honest, but it is paid back in, in spades, and again, something I would encourage. And the last point I'd make is, I think, and again, this is a life lesson, it's something that I learned early on. It is easy for us to get distracted in today's world, even more so than it would have been maybe 30 years ago. But when you hear of something new, you hear of something exciting, you hear of something which isn't necessarily that, something that you're working on, but something that, gets you to think about things differently, it is easy for us to get excited. Excitement's good in life, by the way. Distraction is not. And I'm going to get up for a minute and show you something, because I think that'll kind of illustrate my point. So I carry notebooks. I make lots of notes. You guys make notes. Most of you will probably make them digitally. I tried digital. I like writing with pens and paper. So this is my 16th book, notebook at the moment. I wake up every morning when I go to work. I don't wake up every morning. When I go to work every morning, I open this page up, right? And it lays out what I call the sacred six. These are my priorities. These are also the organization's priorities. Everybody at Linde is fed up of hearing sacred six. They're fed up because I keep talking about it all the time, right? The leadership lesson over here is twofold. First, make sure you know what your priorities are. Sometimes it's nice writing them up. I don't know if some of you journal, but I journal once a week. Take 15, 20 minutes at the end of the week on a Friday just to write down what happened in the week that was exciting, that I learned, things I might do differently. But these priorities are important. So my point here is, the first life lesson: distraction's okay. It's life. But having your priorities right and setting them down and knowing what they are is super important. And it'll really work well for you in life. And I'd encourage you to just maybe find the time to do that. And some of you may not think of it as being useful today, but it's a life lesson that I think will hold you in good stead in the long term. So distractions are okay as long as you know what your priorities are, and you can always get back on track and focus on them. And I'd say that that's something that I would say I took away, as part of my learning, that I was doing lots of things. And then I realized, to be successful, I needed to make sure I focused my time and energy on things that move the needle, that have an impact, and that get me noticed. And some of that was the basis of success that I got early on in my career, which allowed me to move on as well.
Okay, sounds very good. Looking at your career, it looks like it's been up and up and up. Were there any, let's say, turning points, unexpected surprises along the way? I mean, your first firm being bought, of course, probably was something you didn't have planned or foreseen, at least at the very beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I'll talk about two inflection points. The first inflection point is about 3.5 years into my career, when I was still working in India. There was an opportunity to go on a secondment to the UK. I said earlier on, reaching out and going to UK was a very important inflection point for me, for us as a family, to be honest. I had a 1-month son, so he was 1 month old, and we moved to the UK. And I have to be honest and tell you, we lived a fairly comfortable life in India with, the whole family, extended family, and grandparents taking care of the kid and all of that. It was all very, very nice. And then suddenly we found ourselves, 3 of us, my wife, myself, and a 1-month old, in the UK with no help, no support. And we suddenly realized we were actually quite poor. We weren't getting paid as much as we should have got paid. But nonetheless, it is one of those inflection points where we built resilience. I think it built character. And it probably, those 4 years was some of the best years of our lives. And we still look back very fondly at that time, although it was really difficult, but nonetheless, it was a great opportunity. So professionally, what happened from a career point of view was the recognition that we were in 65 countries at that point in time in BOC. And the fact that I was visiting them, I suddenly realized how large the world was. And even more importantly, how mobility is a critical factor for success. And the inflection point set, it came to me, and I kind of took a commitment that I would move with the company if I got the opportunity ever. And I got the opportunity later on and I moved. And there's a reason for that. And one of those reasons in that inflection point was getting out of your comfort zone, going and living, working, studying, and adapting yourself to a new culture creates a huge amount of resilience in individuals, but also opens them up to new experiences and great amounts of learning that happen in short periods of time. It really makes you a better human being, a better professional, and makes you a better leader. And I think that was an important inflection point. It wasn't as dramatic, but I think for me, in the early stages, which was somewhat more formative from a career point of view, it was pretty important. So if you're ever in a dilemma, thinking about should I move to somewhere different for a period of time, I'd encourage you, do it. You will not just enjoy it, most of you will enjoy it. Sometimes you may not be thrilled with it, but for most part, I think you will enjoy it. But the learnings you'll get out of it will be phenomenal, and they just cannot be duplicated in any other scenario. The second inflection point, which is more to the point you were making, which is in 2006, the world was going to come to an end. Now, you didn't know that. But for the people who were working for the company known as BOC, which was my first company that I joined, which was British Oxygen, for people who were working in BOC, the world was ending because the Germans were taking over the Brits. Linde AG, which is as German a company as you get, born out of Munich with a founder, amazing founder, Dr. Karl von Linde. As a company, in 9 days, we turned 147 years old, was going to acquire the British 140-year-old company, which is BOC. So for a large number of my colleagues at that point, that literally was the end of the world. The Germans had finally won. They were taking over the Brits. And oh my God, there was so much emotion. Now, I was a little bit buffered from the emotion because, well, I was Indian. So I didn't feel the same level of emotion. But more importantly, I was open to a new experience. My view was we're going to essentially merge the companies. And one of the heroes in my life that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, Dr. Wolfgang Reitzle, set out the agenda and the strategy for the new company. He came on day 2 of the merger or the acquisition, essentially. He called it a merger, but really, Linde AG acquired BOC. It wasn't a merger, but he was a smart guy who said, look, it's merger. He did 2 things. He called it a merger, and he changed the language, the official language, to English, which my German colleagues were very unhappy with. And some of you in the room might understand that. But those 2 changes, and on day 2, we came to Singapore, which is where I was working at that stage, and laid out the strategy for the company. And I said, I like this leadership, and I like the strategy, and I like the ambition that Dr. Reitzle has laid out. And in my mind, that was the second inflection point. Yes, we were bought over, but what could we make of this new event, this new situation, which could create even more success for us as an organization and for us personally? And to be honest, I put my hand up and said, hey, I'm excited about this new change. So while people were leaving and all the headhunters were knocking on our doors because they felt that this was a good time to try and poach people from the company, I put my hand up and said, I want to be with the company. I want to see where it goes. I want to be part of the success of this organization. Again, it was about taking initiative, putting your hand up and saying, I'm excited about this. I want to be involved. That was an inflection point from a career point of view, right? And having said that, I took over a role. I was managing 7 countries. I kind of, expanded that a little bit to 10 countries. And really, my growth with Linde AG was very fulfilling. And I got the breaks, and every break I got, I grabbed it with both hands and said, I'm going to do something with this that shows results and gets people excited. And I haven't looked back.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your role in the new, let's say, combined company,
Sure.
the post-acquired, post-merged company?
Sure. So I before the merger, I was running a vertical business that was called Process Gas Solutions across 7 countries. Post the merger, I initially took over 10 countries and we renamed that whole region. It was all the businesses put together. So I was no longer looking at the vertical. I was looking at the full P&L, and I was looking at 10 countries in a region that we call South and Southeast Asia. 10 very exciting countries, I have to say. I mean, obviously you had, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. So geographies that I didn't know enough about. And it was a bit humbling as well because, I thought I was this high-flying leader who knew everything about the emerging markets. And I walked into Thailand and realized I didn't know how to do business in Thailand. And I had to learn, and, from Sawadikap to understanding how you talk to the board over there versus people in Singapore who were very straight, and relationship was important but not that important. It was about economics, and then the nuances of India. So it was humbling to learn, but I think the breadth was refreshing, and I did that for a few years before I moved on and then took over the role on the forestand on the executive board as a board member responsible for Asia Pacific.
May I ask, and congratulations for joining the board at that time. So may I ask how that came about? I mean, did you receive a call from Wolfgang Reitzle, Dr. Reitzle?
Right.
Did you already expect that at that point?
So I did not expect that. But one of the things that happened while I was running this region of South and Southeast Asia is Wolfgang Reitzle asked me to come and run a strategy session for the executive board, which is a little bit strange because I wasn't on the executive board. But he said, why didn't you come and facilitate the session and set that up? And it was a three-day session. He hosted that in his wonderful house that he had in Lucca in Italy, and his winery. So I mean, he's a man of great passion of many things, but wine was one of them. So he hosted us there, and I ran this workshop for them. And I think in some ways he was testing me, to be honest. And in others, I was getting exposure to how the board was thinking. And I felt I had a lot of contribution to make to those conversations. And I felt that strategy session went really well. And soon after that, he reached out to me, and he actually came to Singapore again. And I was taking him around, meeting customers, etc. And he said, Sanjiv, I'm thinking about creating Asia Pacific. And would you be interested in leading it?
And you immediately said yes, or what was your
He
statement?
says to me that I think I was stunned, speechless for 5 seconds. That rarely happens, right? I talk a lot, as you can make out. But I was stunned, speechless for 5 seconds, and I said, of course, Dr. Reitzle. So that's how the story goes.
Okay. And what did you do in the board then?
So running Asia Pacific was a big deal, right? I mean, it was our emerging high growth segment. And my responsibility at the executive board was twofold. One, I led as the segment head for Asia Pacific. I had responsibility. So I was COO Asia Pacific. So I led that business. I drew out the strategy. I ensured we executed the strategy. And that was a time of high growth, right? I took it over in 2011. China was flourishing. We were investing $1 billion a year in China, and there were some amazing projects happening. India was starting to pick up a little bit. South and Southeast Asia was picking up. So it's a really exciting time. So managing the strategy and executing and delivering results every quarter, I think that was part of the responsibility. But equally, I think the new part of the responsibility was the fact that as an executive board member, I, alongside my colleagues, we were together responsible for the strategy for Linde AG. Right. And that was a much bigger obligation. I didn't quite understand it. Let's be honest. When he said, do you want to take over as head of APAC and join the executive board? I said, of course. And yay. And we went and had champagne that night. But what I didn't quite understand is what that job really entailed. And sometimes I'll give you a Mark Twain quote, which I quite like. Mark Twain said, for success, you need ignorance and boldness. For success, you need ignorance and boldness. But that was me. Ignorant as to what that job really entailed, and bold to say yes even before I thought about it. But do I regret it? Absolutely not. Would I do it again? Absolutely. It was an amazing period. There was transformation happening, understanding what we could do at the board, how together. And to be honest, I was the first Asian member on the executive board, so that made a bit of a difference. I felt that provided inspiration to people in Asia as well to say, hey, you can do that. So for me, that is an important part of the message, but also it was important that I was chosen on merit, that I had something to contribute which would make Linde AG a better organization. And I took that quite seriously. And I was excited and I enjoyed that period tremendously well.
All right. Well, doing research work in the area of strategy, can you maybe from your perspective describe how strategy work was done at Linde, how you develop a good strategy? And then also maybe a second follow-up question, you can pose it again. There was one major happening, which is the the merger with Praxair, between Linde and Praxair.
Correct.
Can you elaborate on that as well?
I can. So let's talk about strategy first, and I'll talk about the merger. And the merger had lots of drama with it, which is fairly public, so you would know about most of that. But I'll give you a bit of insight there. Let's start with the strategy first, right? So we've all read books on strategy. You guys are probably learning about strategy. I'm sure Professor Lee is talking about strategy. The message I want to leave on strategy, and I'll talk about the process in a minute, but the message I want to leave on strategy is the most important word associated with strategy is not strategy, it's execution. Organizations with great strategies, 40-page decks which lay out beautiful strategies in PowerPoint, are completely useless. You can quote me on this. And are a waste of time because they don't get the execution right. So great organizations with great strategy and poor execution go nowhere. Mediocre organizations, not that I like mediocre organizations, but mediocre organizations with a reasonable strategy and high quality execution will always create more value. So the allure or the glamour or the fact that you want a sexy strategy sometimes gets us all excited and it looks pretty on paper, but nobody really understands it. And, very often we do a poor job of communicating the strategy as well. So the point on strategy I do want to make is, spend more time thinking about the execution of the strategy than just the strategy. The best strategy is one that you can put on a single sheet of paper. I may be contradicting Professor Lee now, and I might be in trouble after this, but in Linde PLC today, I have a single slide that captures the strategy of the company, just one. 65,000 people around the world know what that strategy is and what their role in contributing to the strategy is. My competitors have multiple pages in their decks trying to explain their strategy. And for me, that is the first failure of strategy. So how do we develop strategy in Linde then and now? I think the process is somewhat similar. So you have two kind of developments that happen around strategy, bottom up and top down. Bottom up is, we are in 80 plus countries today. So every country needs a strategy and they need direction as to what they're trying to achieve. So each country develops their strategy at every region, and then the segment level, that strategy is reviewed, discussed, challenged, and alongside that, then they prepare an execution plan saying these are things we do to operationalize this beautiful strategy that we put together. That aggregates up to the Linde PLC level, right? So 80 countries, 4 business segments, it all kind of comes together. But that is not the strategy of the company. When you aggregate strategy that comes bottom up, that is a strategic framework within which its businesses operate. It's not necessarily the strategy of the company. The strategy of the company is when you take what you've distilled out of that and have a conversation at the executive leadership team to talk about the direction in which you want the businesses to go. Why do I say there is a difference? There's a difference because people who aggregate strategy from bottom up are thinking about their businesses in a very narrow frame of mind. They're thinking about what they have and potentially some of the ambition they might have associated with that. Whereas when you're thinking of the strategy for a corporation, you're starting to think about what is the shape of the world going to be? What am I going to participate in which I don't do today? What adjacencies are meaningful? What can I do with the core capabilities that I have and enter new markets where I can create greater value? And last but not least, how do I create value for my shareholders? And many of those conversations don't always happen at the grassroots level when people are building their strategy up. So the top-down process has very significant value. And I think that's where the shape of the organizational strategy really comes together. And that's where direction and clarity is provided to the organization, including step outs and doing things differently and entering new markets and new geographies and so on and so forth. So that's just from a process point of view. Let's talk about the merger. So it was 2015, 2016, initial conversations about the merger between Praxair Inc. out of the US and Linde AG commenced. The market was in a difficult spot. You might remember the commodity cycle had already turned. Emerging markets were down. BRICS were in trouble. Growth was largely non-existent. And every company was thinking about their strategy. And one of the things that I think both Praxair and Linde AG had thought about was, is there an opportunity for one last consolidation in the industry, right? Industry consolidation is a strategic intervention. It's where you think about bringing two large players together because you can create value as a result of doing that. So initial conversations happened. They largely failed because the egos of senior executives were in play. And you'll have to appreciate this. People feel threatened when you have mergers like this. They don't know if they have a job, don't have a job, etc. So people get very emotional about these things. And I think we had a lot of emotion on the Linde AG side, where the executive board was a little bit frayed on this topic. So it stopped for a period of time. We kind of called it off, and then we restarted that with some management changes that happened. And the industrial logic for the merger of Praxair, which was the most profitable business in the industry, they were the leader in profitability, and Linde AG, which was the leader in technology and providing solutions and engineering capability, bringing those two together was a no-brainer. It was the best industrial logic you could create. The challenge was, how do you take an American business and a German business, global, both global in nature, but nonetheless the DNA was German and the DNA was American, and bring them together successfully? Because you know what? Everybody remembered Daimler Chrysler, what a disaster that was. And I'm sure there were a couple of other transactions that failed as well. And they said, it is just not possible. The Germans cannot work with the Americans. And so there was a lot of emotion on whether you could successfully merge the two businesses. We did merge the two businesses. We went through the whole process of getting approval, and all the drama happened, and convincing the Works Council, which is a big task, I have to say, assuring them that there was a future for our employees and we would do well as a corporation. Convincing the investors, because they had to approve and say, yes, we think this is a good idea. Convincing them that we would create value. You talked about the market cap doubling. There is value has been created along the way. Our market cap, when we were thinking about the merger, was combined market cap for the two corporations was about 80 to 19 billion US dollars. Today, our market cap, I looked at it as I came in, was $240 billion. So we've done reasonably well. And a lot of credit goes to the two leaders who kind of really took this on as a personal project, right? Wolfgang Reitzle on the Linde AG side, and Steve Angel on the Praxair Inc. side. And they really made a personal commitment to making this merger happen. And all of us played a role, and I'm happy that I was able to play a role to do a lot to make that merger move along. But that leadership was super critical. So leadership matters. Industrial logic has to be sound, and you have to have confidence that you can create value. If those three things fall in place, you have the makings of a very successful merger. And I think I'm proud that we are part of that merged entity today as Linde PLC, and we have found value in so many different ways. I can give you lots of examples, but let me stop and see if Professor Lee has other questions.
All right. Well, it certainly is a success story, and you certainly and clearly did an excellent job, because you were then at some point called to become CEO of the company. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? Were there, again, 5 seconds of silence, or was that a bit more expected?
Well, no, it wasn't expected. So I was living in Singapore. I said to you, been living in Singapore. So we were living in Singapore. We were about 16 years in Singapore. We were well settled. We bought a house. We did it up because we said this is where we're going to retire, so it feels good. This is good. And then I got a call from Steve Angel who said, and I just completed a big deal with ExxonMobil, and we were successfully executing that. I was really passionate about some of the growth that was happening. And he called me up and had a conversation and said, "Hey, would you have an interest in being considered for the CEO position?" And at that stage, he said the first step would be, of course, being selected as a COO, a Chief Operating Officer, and then we will consider the CEO. But I want you to know transparently, this is how the process works. It came as a surprise. I don't think I was stunned for 5 seconds, but it was a surprise. And I said, yeah, well, I'm happy to be considered. And obviously I was curious to understand who else was being considered. And there were 4 or 5 people being considered from the executive leadership team or the executive committee. And, we were part of the process. And I just felt, look, I just give it a shot. I have to be honest and tell you, when I spoke to my wife, we weren't thrilled about going to the US. We were never excited about going to the US. We always traveled there, liked it, etc. But it wasn't something which was on our radar that, hey, we've got to go and live in the US. I went through the process. It was a very, very well thought through process. And it stands out in my mind as a good case study of how good succession planning should happen. The entire board was involved. I got interviewed by every board member. We had 12 board members. So it is in the middle of COVID. So I was sitting at home late nights for calls in the US with the US and so on and so forth. And the other people who were in the fray were also kind of went through the same process. In the end, I was selected in October 2020 as the COO, incoming COO, which I took over on 1st January 2021. And we had mixed feelings about it, to be honest, from a family point of view. Okay. We were in the middle of COVID. Singapore was a very safe place to be. We loved our life there. Food is great in Singapore. If you haven't visited, definitely visit. Outstanding food, you love it. But we look, all my life, my family has supported every move I've made, right? So they were really amazing in saying, yeah, we'll do it. Let's do it. Let's see what it's like. So we landed up in Connecticut in February 2021. I think it was the 16th of February. On the 17th of February, we had 2 feet of snow. Remember, we came from Singapore. 33 degrees right through the year. We have winter when it's 32.5 degrees. So, and where did we end up? We ended up at -5. So a rather cold welcome, not the warm welcome that we were looking for. But hey, we moved in February to Connecticut. What do you expect? But anyway, so I have to say I've been pleasantly surprised by the US and been surprised by the people. They are really genuinely nice people, certainly in New England and in the East Coast, and people at work are amazing. I'm really enjoying that piece, not recognizing that I had a lot of unconscious bias against the US with which I came. And I learned very quickly that 100-day plans are not worth much. And the things that really work, and something that I believe is important for me today, and I believe is important for you today, are 3 things that you need to always hold dear. Part of the skill set that you need to have in your portfolio of skills that you're developing. The first, adaptability. You have to be able to adapt to everything that happens around you. It's not an option. When COVID happened, you all adopted, right? Adapted yourselves, right? You changed. We all changed as a society. Not always in a good way, but we changed. We adapted ourselves. So adaptability, has to be something that you practice all the time. It's a muscle that you need to develop. Just like you go to the gym and develop your muscles, adaptability is a similar muscle that you must have. The second skill set I would say to you, important for you and certainly for me today, remains important, is resilience. When times get tough, you have to be willing to sit down and recognize the reality of the moment. sounds like somebody preaching to you. But as you see real life situations along your journeys, you will realize that resilience is at the heart of how you are successful. So if you're adaptable and you can change with what is happening in the world around you, and you're resilient, that means you can stand up, have the courage to do what is right in those situations, and make sure that you take care of yourself, but also take care of people around you. That goes a long way in creating a path for success. And the last piece I'd say to you, which is important now, and I think at some stage we'll talk about AI, I'm sure, and I'll say to you, one of the key skills that I look for in people, which I'm recruiting today, is collaboration. So adaptability, resilience, and collaboration. If Professor Lee, not if, but when he asked me, what do I look for when I'm hiring people today? These are the three elements I look for when I'm hiring people today. And it's difficult to test for this in an interview. Imagine sitting in an interview and you get to see somebody for 60 minutes, and how do you judge whether they are adaptable, resilient, and whether they can collaborate effectively? But for me, that is the acid test of being successful in today's business environment.
So how can you assess people then if you only have a limited period of time? And maybe one or two details on collaboration. What do you mean by that? As in being a team player, or?
Right, a little bit more than that. So collaboration for me stems from two separate concepts. The first is the willingness to play any role in a team. Very often we think about collaboration as, two people coming together or two teams coming together and working together on something. You know what? When people come together and work together on something, they're not always successful. Just because I asked two teams in my organization, hey, you work together on this. You think the end result is going to be successful? There is no guarantee of that. There is no guarantee of that. Yes, if you structure the team well and you have very clear goals laid out and you have a good process for monitoring progress, yes, potentially you could have a successful outcome. But there isn't a guarantee that by people just collaborating, you get success. Success happens for me when people collaborate, when they are willing to take on any role that they need to take on in the team, ensuring that the goal of the team is met. So you are willing to take on any role. In some cases, leaders who want to lead the teams have to step back and let the other members of the team do what they need to do, because that's the way to get a successful outcome. In some cases, you have to lead from the front because you're finding the team is not coherent. They are all over the place and they're not getting their act together. Somebody has to step up. Doesn't have to be the person I appoint as the team leader. Could be somebody else who's influential enough in the team to be able to step up and say, hey, I think we should do it this way. Sometimes you need somebody who facilitates a conversation in the team, ensuring that two people who are brilliant at what they do, but just can't talk to each other, learn how to talk to each other, learn each other's language. For me, that is collaboration. And for me, collaboration goes deeper than just saying you're a team player. Team player is cliche. I don't know what it means, to be honest. What do you mean team player, right? I mean, okay, in sports, I understand. Because I like sports and I like the fact that we have a competitive spirit. But then there are no guarantees that people collaborate, you'll have success.
Okay. What about dealing or trying to recognize whether someone in front of you that you don't know, that you've not worked with for months and years, has those kind of characteristics?
So as I said, there is, this is an art and there is no science yet. I think there is a methodology around this. I'm going to explain to you what I'm doing at the moment with this. But there's a methodology around how you can assess people for adaptability, resilience, collaboration, understanding. And this could be somebody new, or it could also be somebody coming into the organization, new role. You may need to test them for that as well. So here is where we are applying AI, right? So we have set up, we've used an AI tool that uses a lot of our interview experiences from the past. And we've set up a number of simulations where we now simulate and ask people to respond to simulations. We're just testing it out internally at the moment. We haven't tried with external candidates. We're still in a knowledge capture and validation process. But I see this as a good way of applying an AI model which is self-learning and constantly improves in a process like this. there's no guarantee of success just yet, but I feel optimistic that this is at least an opportunity for us to apply a new methodology to codify behavior in a way that helps us better assess it.
All right. Before we talk about what type of people Linde and you're looking for and perhaps what Linde does, let's maybe talk a little bit about your CEO role today. Yeah. So what have been some of the highlights you've experienced in your role as CEO? What are some of the goals you have for the company? And one little anecdotal highlight was, as I mentioned before, I mean, you even voluntarily chose to be removed from the DAX index, which is
That's right.
Something, did you within
controversial. The team... Okay, so the CEO role, I think, all CEOs, and I'm no exception to that, have a very clear path to what they need to deliver, right? And they have multiple stakeholders. And if you think about the stakeholders, for us, the stakeholders are our shareholders, our employees, our community, and our customers, right? And every CEO has to distill the obligations to these stakeholders to make sure that they create what they do every day, creating that value. So you see my priorities set out. They've been set out with that basis. So I'm going to read them out because I think in some ways they kind of give you a sense of. So the sacred six, which everyone is fed up of listening to, I start with safety and compliance. Safety and compliance are hygiene factors. To keep our people safe and to keep the reputation of our organization safe is a starting point. That's my role. I have to make sure that we're doing everything we need to do to manage safety and compliance every day. So that's one of the key roles a CEO plays. Every leader plays, but as a CEO, you take responsibility for the entire ownership of the company. My second point is profitable growth. I'm a growth guy. I'm known to be a growth guy. I get excited about growth, and we can talk about growth if you want. And profitable growth for me is a critical element of strategy execution, right? I say strategies need to be simple, that people can understand. So when I've just come from the business in UK. Last year, I went to 22 different countries. To each of them, I talk about how do you take the strategy and generate profitable growth. So that's number two. The third is margin expansion. When I expand my margin, what is margin? Operating margin is EBIT, earnings before interest and tax, divided by sales, right? So it says, how much value do you create? How much earnings do you create before interest and tax, which shows the quality of the business you have. So the reason I want to see our businesses and our regions expand margin is because it shows to me that they're improving the quality of their business. We can do the math at some stage if you want, but for now I'll leave it there, and I can explain to you the EPS algorithm that we go and talk to our shareholders about. Then cash flow generation. Why do I want cash flow generation? And why do I want in our strategy a clear focus on cash flows? Two reasons. One, cash is real. P&L, I often say to my CFO, is my CFO's imagination. Cash is real. You can't, in P&L, you apply lots of accounting standards and you end up with a result that most people don't understand. But cash is cash. It's in the bank. You can't dispute it. So cash is real. So the one way I measure the quality of my businesses is how much cash they generate. And the second reason cash is important is because it allows me to reinvest in the business. Linde today invests about $5 billion in capital expenditure every year. $5 billion every year. That's a lot of money. So to invest that, we need to generate that first, right? So cash flow is important. Second last, return on capital. This is a metric by which your investors look at you. So I want return on capital above 20%. We're almost double the return on capital of our competitors, which I think is a really great place. That means we manage capital allocation well. One of the key roles of a CEO is how to manage capital allocation. What is capital allocation? Where do you put your capital? Where do you invest your capital? What decisions do you make on capital? But also, where do you deploy capital so that it goes back to your shareholders? That's also part of your capital allocation decision making. And last but not least, the foundation of our success, people and sustainability. We consider safety and compliance as the license to operate, and people and sustainability as the foundation on which we build our success and this organization. So those are things. Now, this is a very simple way of kind of telling you the 6 priorities I have. But the reality is, in the CEO's role, I find a way between strategy, execution, quarterly performance, people and talent development, and succession planning, and creating the right sustainability metrics in the organization to drive sustainability forward and ensuring that our values are lived every day. I bring that all together in the role that I serve as CEO. Let's talk about DAX. So we had a number of conversations with the DAX when it was the DAX 30. We were number one on that for a long period of time. And as Professor Lee explained to you, because we were a successful organization, we were constantly improving the quality of our business, our market capitalization was continuing to grow. And every time it grew, DAX had a cap of 10%. Well-intentioned, I don't disagree that it is well-intentioned, that in no index, passive or active, should you have more than 10% in any one company. So you should not invest more than 10% in any one company. The reason that was a problem was the non-German or non-European shareholders. So we were dual listed. We were one of the first companies with dual listing as we merged the two entities. We were listed in New York Stock Exchange as well as in Frankfurt at the DAX. So the rest of our investors challenged us to say, hey, there is something wrong, because if you're being technically sold off in Frankfurt, your share price drops down, right? Share price is effectively a mechanism of lots of complex things, but think of it simply as a model that says it's demand and supply. If people want to buy your shares and liquidity is low, your price goes up because they're willing to pay a higher price for your share. But if somebody's selling you down all the time, every quarter, because you're doing well, then your share price keeps going down, and then you work hard to bring it back up again, and then it goes down the next quarter. You have to pardon my saying, it's stupid, right? And we said that to Deutsche Börse with not in those terms, much more diplomatically. And we had a long conversation, and they said, no, we can't change. And we said, well, we have no option. It almost at that point, it's a fiduciary responsibility, because the other investors are now starting to get upset about this. And we said, look, we have a problem. Otherwise, we will exit the DAX. And they said, no, you can't, and you shouldn't do that. And they didn't take us seriously. I think it's October 2022 when we pulled the plug. I think it's October 2022. When we took a decision on the board, and I called up the CEO of Deutsche Börse and told him, look, I want to give you a heads up. You'll see the headline tomorrow, but we are leaving. And he said, no, it cannot be possible. And every who's who from Germany started calling me. And I said, well, we had this conversation for 12 months. Nobody wanted to speak to us. And now, you suddenly calling us. The board has made a decision. It's gone public. There's not much I can do. So the point over there, I think, to your point earlier on, was we have an obligation as a board and as a corporation to create value for our shareholders. And if there is a technical reason, impediment for that being blocked, then we have to address that. So for us, it was less about, will we compromise and stay in the DAX because although there's lower value, but it wasn't that. It was just we were following a fiduciary responsibility of being responsible to our shareholders and making sure they did not suffer for technical reasons. Now, guess what DAX or what Deutsche Börse did after that? Expanded the DAX and raised the limit to 15%. And today's SAP has the same problem. I speak to CEO of SAP often, and well, what can I say? So that is the story on that.
Got it. Yeah, very fascinating background. Let's talk about Linde.
Yeah.
You have a few slogans, including making our world more productive, or Linde is everywhere, which I think looking at your product line, it sure is. But from kind of the top level, what does Linde do?
So I'm going to make a pitch over here, Professor Lee, right? So I'm going to start by saying, do any of you have Linde products? Anyone? Yeah, you're wrong. So does anyone have an iPhone over here? Right? Almost all of you? Or an Android? Well, I've got €3 of my gas sitting in your iPhone. The chip that TSMC, Samsung, or Intel, Micron, Infineon manufacture uses my gas, and without that gas being available, you cannot have a semiconductor manufacturing process, right? So there's a good example. How many of you like beer? Few maybe. Nobody wants to. Quite shy group.
They're
Right?
shy. That's not true.
Well, would you ever be? So one anecdote before I carry on with this. Dr. Carl von Linde, a founder, founded this company by developing a process called the refrigeration cycle, right? All of you have refrigerators at home, you cool things down. Well, he was the founder of that process, okay? But do you know why he invented the refrigeration process? He's based out of Munich, right? He was a professor at TUM, little known fact. The predecessor of TUM, he was a professor at. Do you know why? Because he wanted to chill beer. What an amazing purpose in life. I mean, that is the founder. You know, we come from really great pedigree. We chilled beer. I mean, we saved the world. He saved the world and we took credit for it. So, so coming back, I mean, if you like beer, carbonation and beer, or if you don't like beer and have Coke, carbonation and Coke comes from us. Any elements of steel, aluminum, anything that is manufactured using hydrocarbons. So most of the clothes that you're wearing actually have a little bit of my gas in it. Because without that, you wouldn't have polyester or you wouldn't have fabrics. The car that you're going to drive or maybe the bicycle you're going to ride has a bit of my gas in it, because without that, you can't manufacture steel or you can't manufacture aluminum or you can't manufacture rubber. And if you've got a battery in there, you can't manufacture battery. The cathode and anode production process comes from Linde. We provide the gases that allow cathodes and anodes to be manufactured. So I'll stop there because I could carry on with two small facts. Anyone like pizzas? Now in the US, they like frozen pizzas. Not so sure about that, but okay. We chill 2 billion pizzas a year. 2 billion pizzas a year. I don't know who eats them. My kids probably eat a little bit of that. But 2 billion pizzas a year. So that's just to give you a kind of sense of, when you say Linde is everywhere, we literally are everywhere. And while I won't take credit for it now, but you're breathing us as you speak, right? You're breathing air, it turns into oxygen, oxygenates your body. That's our business, right? So we're all about cryogenics and that. Some of the things that you don't normally hear about, rocket launches. SpaceX IPO going live. I haven't seen what happened to the share price. I'll see once we finish the session. But SpaceX launched a rocket last year every 2.3 days. They launched 170 rockets, Falcon and Falcon Heavies. 170 rockets last year, every 2.3 days. Every time the rocket goes up, we provide the propellant for that. We provide the oxygen, nitrogen, oxygen alongside either methane or hydrogen for rockets to go up. When Artemis went up and they saw the moon, we provide the propellants for the Artemis going up. So, you know, we literally are in rocket science. I mean, we make rockets happen, feel good about that. It's pretty cool. So while we're not known, we're invisible, you know, you guys don't really hear of us often, but we are sitting there serving industry, creating value, making our future better. And I think that's our mission. Our mission is to make the world more productive sustainably. And in many ways, we live that every day. Decarbonization is a big deal for us. We're currently investing 5 billion decarbonization projects. A lot more has to happen around the world. We can talk about that, but I think decarbonization is another way to think about it. So Linde literally is everywhere. Our business is making sure that we take our technology, that we innovate around and create, you know, competitive advantage as a result of that innovation, and deploy that for the production of industrial gases or the manufacture of equipment and plants that provide industrial complexes around the world, various industries, the ability to improve their industrial processes and create value for their shareholders and stakeholders. And that really is our business. We are here to help industries be more successful.
Okay. And being in so many industries, and I think you're also very strong in healthcare.
That's correct.
You know, what's your perspective on centralization versus decentralization? And do you give your business units a lot of autonomy, you know, based on your principles?
So I'll cover healthcare first because I was remiss in not talking about healthcare, right? So let me do that. So we serve 2 million patients around the world, some at home and many in hospitals. And I think the reason I wanted to, make sure I mention healthcare is because this was one of the most humbling moments in my journey with the company, right? I took over as COO. We were in the middle of COVID, and about 40,000 frontline employees at Linde were filling oxygen cylinders every day, taking them to COVID hospitals, taking empty cylinders that had been used by COVID patients, bringing them back, cleaning them, going back to the hospitals every day. Now remember, in COVID, what were we doing? We were all staying at home, right? But 40,000 employees were doing this every day, going to a COVID hospital, which nobody wanted to go to, picking up cylinders of medical oxygen that was saving lives, bring them back, cleaning them, and taking them back in. I only mention this to you because very often people talk about values of organizations, right? As a senior leader, I was humbled by the commitment our employees brought when COVID happened. And we did some crazy and amazing things to save lives. We took containers into the Amazon. We flew oxygen into the Amazon, unusual. We used ships and helicopters and aircrafts to move oxygen in different parts of the world, wherever there was a shortage, to try and save lives as much as we could. It was a great example of the values of the organization being demonstrated by the employees and not just posters on the wall. And I think it is very humbling for senior leaders to see that. And I think we all feel proud of the fact that our employees have that level of commitment. So I just want to bring that up because I think it'd be wrong if I didn't mention our employees who did that tremendous job.
And I can see you're really still touched by what your employees did. So, and I think we're all grateful that you did. Yeah.
Centralization. Oh, wow. This is a great question. I am absolutely against centralization. I am deeply, passionately for decentralization. For me, success comes from the right mix of accountability and empowerment, right? There may be some industries in the world where a centralized model is right. But if you want to be an entrepreneurial industry or a business or an organization, you need to be decentralized with empowerment for the businesses to go and execute a local strategy. Now, part of that is driven by our strategy, right? And the nature of our business, the business model. It is a local business model. Gases don't travel well long distances. So when you have a local business, if that business is not held accountable for executing the strategy and delivering results, and that business is not empowered to do that, you create enormous amount of waste in the system, you create inefficiencies, and you destroy value. And for me, for our industry particularly, the decentralized model is the only model that I will ever accept.
All right. Sounds good. Two topics I want to talk about before we, slowly go over to the students.
Sure.
One is sustainability. You mentioned it a few times before, and I think your company has been making some major contributions for other industries as well. The second one is the topic everyone has been talking about recently, artificial intelligence, AI.
Yeah.
So can you tell us your approach to sustainability and to AI?
Yeah. So, we've been working on sustainability for 15 years, well before it became fashionable, well before the indices came out, and well before people talked about ESG. The reason we did that was because we believe that, our mission as we laid out is to make our world more productive sustainably. So that mission's been in our DNA for a long time. And we recognize that in some ways, some of the industrial processes that we follow create emissions. And we've always been looking to find how do we make sure that on a net basis, we're always net negative, not even zero. And so this is what happens, right? We look at our own emissions today, and I'm focused on emissions on sustainability, which is a big topic. We could talk about, SDG and many other elements within the SDG. But if I just talk about emissions as an illustrative point, we recognize that in our processes, when we produce hydrogen as an example, or when we even produce oxygen because we use electricity from the grid, we have emissions that are related direct and indirect to our portfolio of activities that we do. And we took on a goal consciously, more than a decade ago, to consistently reduce our emissions. We now have a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 35% by 2035 while we grow the business. And I can tell you, it sounds easy, 35 by 35, but it's a really tough ask, really tough ask. And part of that is driven by the fact that the regulatory environment, which we were hoping would be more supportive for decarbonization, political support is always a little bit moody, kind of moves from time to time, depending on how the politicians feel. So at the moment, decarbonization is not a hot topic. And I can understand why. Energy security is more important than energy transition for the politicians, because I think they are concerned about that. But you need a strong regulatory framework for this to progress. So, which is a challenge. But notwithstanding that challenge, we remain committed to investing in and reducing our own emissions. But even more importantly, I said to you, we want to be net negative. Today, by the use of our products for the different industries and customers we serve, we reduce abate emissions by almost 2.7 times what we emit ourselves. So we reduce almost 90 million tons of greenhouse gas equivalent emissions every year through the use of our products. And for me, that really is where our sustainability aim is. And it's not whether it's accounted for or not, I don't really care. Does the world and the planet benefit as a result of applying these gases and reducing emissions? And the answer is yes. And for me, that is the acid test. So we will do what we need to do for our own operations. We do that every year, and we actually incentivize our management on that as well. So there is a specific part of the variable compensation that get paid for reduction in emissions. And if they don't get paid that. So I think there is some incentive in there as well. Human behavior is driven by incentives, so we made sure that we included that in the incentive program as well. But alongside that, we also are helping various industries reduce their emissions as well. So for me, that goal remains very, 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 very critical and important. And I think we are on a path to 35% reduction by 2035 and neutrality by 2050, which is quite tough and lots of work has to happen on the grid, etc. But I think we'll kind of work our way through that and face those challenges as we move forward.
All right. Makes sense. What about the topic of AI?
So no conversation's complete today unless you talk about AI, right? So the way we think about AI, so at Linde, we set up an AI council 2.5 years ago. And we laid out an objective of the AI council was to make sure that AI deployment at Linde happens aligned with our values. We're a company of values. We feel strongly about our values. And we wanted to make sure that as we were deploying AI, that we were aligning that with our values, because we recognize that our success as an organization comes from, leveraging the strength of our values and our employees. So that was just kind of the high-level framework. We operationalized AI using data that we've been collecting for more than 30 years, right? So we have a very robust process from our operational side in particular to collect data and hold it in iHistorian, etc. We just didn't have the compute power to do much with it. Today, we have the compute power available. So we've been training initially from a machine learning point of view. We've been training algorithms to make sure that we deploy that in how we operationalize and optimize the plant operations we have, the trucks that we have on the road, etc. I'll give you some specific examples in a minute. And then the next step is to move that onto AI models, train the models and deploy them. So we have, I think over the last 2.5, 3 years, probably had 500 use cases. For us, AI benefits are tangible. We have a very disciplined approach to AI, which I'll explain to you, but let me just talk about tangible results today, and I'll give you some examples how we deploy it. So we have a very robust productivity program, which we've been running for decades. In those productivity programs, we find new projects every year, which ensure that we become more efficient. We either optimize or we generate revenue. There are only two elements in productivity. You optimize your cost base or you generate revenues. And we consistently follow this. So last year, we did 17,000 new projects. Kind of means almost every employee within the organization has some role to play in a productivity project. And people are proud of that. And we put it into a platform that we call Power Steering, where it's validated and the use cases are tested and then reported. So we took the same approach with AI. We said we're not going to do AI for the sake of AI. If there is a business pain point, if there is a revenue generation opportunity, we will deploy AI, we'll have a use case, and so we put that on the platform. So out of the 17,000 projects, 35% of our productivity benefits are today driven by digital and AI solutions. Of those 35%, actually more than 35%, but let's round up 35%, 1/3 comes from AI models that we've trained over the last 2.5 years. So the points I'd make over there is, one, we have a disciplined approach to making sure there's a use case that that either creates value or addresses a business pain point. And for us, that's how you think about AI deployment, not just AI for the sake of AI. Second, we want to validate those use cases because we want to encourage replication of what we see elsewhere in the world. So it's very important for us that the proof of concept happens, we run the pilot, we validate it, and then we deploy around the world. We're in 80 countries, so that helps. And the third piece is we are building up our AI capability to ensure that we are LLM agnostic. So one of my concerns, I mean, tokenomics has now become a major topic, right? Uber said that in the first 4 months, by April, they'd consumed their entire AI budget for the year, this year, right? So they've stopped using tokens because they've consumed their entire budget, which just means that, if you deploy AI without a disciplined approach, there's a very significant cost, right? All this data center buildup that is happening, someone's got to pay for it. And that significant cost of tokens, I think, has to be constantly thought about because you're looking at trade-offs. And in deployment of AI, you are looking at some benefit cases that have to come through. So I think for us, it is very important that we don't get hooked onto any one LLM, and therefore we are using everything that's available and testing new ones as well. We're looking at open source as well. A lot of the Chinese LLMs are open source. As you know, the US LLMs are closed source. Lots of pros and cons and advantages, disadvantages, some concerns around data exfiltration, etc. But I think all of those things are in our AI strategy as we move forward.
All right, very good, very good. You already gave a lot of reasons, I think, for people to be interested in joining Linde, and you also explained to some extent the type of people and leaders you're looking for. Nevertheless, if you were to give a summary, also against the background or backdrop of, I think, one of your HR slogans for employees is "Be Linde, be limitless."
Be limitless,
right? So, can you give us a summary of what type of people you're looking for?
Yeah. So let me give you a summary of what Linde offers, and then I'll match that with the type of people you're looking for. So we're a company of values. I would always encourage you in this room, as you think about where you want to go and work, make sure your values align with the values of the corporation you're working at. That remains very important. We're a company that's excited about growth. So if you're somebody who's looking for growth, personal and the ability to deliver growth for the organization, Linde looks for people who get excited about growth and want to do new things, different things, new markets, and have an attitude to go out and conquer and make things happen. We're a company that believes in a high performance culture. People will describe our company as being really tough on performance. We love performance. We're constantly benchmarking. The reason I ran the FIFA World Cup challenge for the internal, because I want internal competition to happen between businesses to say, hey, I want to be better than the other one. I was in the UK with our business there, and I just gave them their award. They are the margin champions in Linde. So they got a pin that says margin champion. So we like to make sure people are, they're competitive, they have an edge, they want to do well. But at the same time, we like people who work well with teams. We always promote, my view always is 1 + 1 is more than 2. And, deploying just a wonderful individual who's or she is driven by their own contributions is never going to be enough for us. We always need that individual to know that when they are part of a team, they can deliver so much more. And I think we look for that in our teams and our people. And I think we are lucky to have some amazing people who do a brilliant job at that. And the last piece I'd say is we're a company that believes that innovation is at the heart of change that makes a difference to the world. And I think we believe innovation is critical in everything that we do. And innovation is not about technology. Innovation is about how we work, how we do things, how we commercially set ourselves up, the business models that we work with, and of course technology, which is at the heart of, Linde and our founder forming, coming out as an innovator on technology. So what do you need to have when we're looking at you? The three things I said earlier, you obviously made a note of that, right? Adaptability, resilience, and collaboration. But I also look at people who have three other things that they think about, right? And I say this to our people all the time. So I'm just repeating what I say to them. I want people to be ambitious. I want people to be ambitious. If you're not ambitious, if you're satisfied with status quo, Linde is probably not the place for you. I want people to have courage. It takes courage to stand up and make a case for yourself. It takes courage to do the right thing. It takes courage to own your mistakes. I want people with courage, because courage makes our organization better. If we don't have that courage, then I think much of this high performance culture that we want will actually not move to the next level. And the last piece is execution. Strategy is fancy, execution is dollars. So execution is what gets us the value that we get. And if you are unable to execute, then Linde may not be the place for you.
Okay, sounds excellent. Let me wrap up our session with a set of quickfire questions.
Absolutely.
Some are a bit personal.
Sure.
What type of food do you like?
Japanese.
All right. Any favorite dish?
Any Japanese dish I love. I mean,
what about music? What type of music do you like to listen to?
I try and listen to music that my kids listen to, which is terrible. But I try and listen because I want to be with the times, right? I don't want to be caught up in the rock of the ages. But I listen to pop.
Okay. Since you're doing carbonization of water and Coke and so on, do you prefer still or sparkling water?
So I prefer still water, but I will have sparkling when I have a nice meal.
Okay. Any favorite vacation spot or area?
Yes, Maldives, diving.
Okay, very good. What about free time activities? If you do have some free time, what do you do?
Try and sleep. I like to golf when I get a chance. I golf twice or thrice a year, unfortunately. So it's my favorite sport, but I don't. I follow F1. I'm a passionate F1 fan. I'm a Max Verstappen fan, which is terrible at the moment. Oh my God. So my son and I both follow. He follows Lewis Hamilton. I follow Max, and we fight all the time. And we go and watch F1 races. And so that's one of my passions, F1. I think it brings technology and humans together. And that's the story of Linde. We are all about technology and humans coming together for ultra high performance.
All right. What about books? Do you have any types of books you like to read?
I read all the time. I buy more books than I read. My library is really good. If you guys need to borrow, come and borrow from me. But I'm reading a number of books on AI at the moment, just trying to educate myself.
All right. If you were stranded on an island by yourself, you could not bring anyone, but one thing, what would it be?
Probably a book.
A book. All right. What's your favorite gas? Since we're talking about so much.
Oh, hydrogen.
Hydrogen. All right.
It's a magical molecule. Magical.
All right. And favorite atmospheric gas?
Has to be argon because it sells at a higher price.
Well, please allow me one last question,
Absolutely.
Mr. Lamba. If you were to look back in a few decades at all that you've achieved, what type of achievement, what type of legacy do you want to leave behind?
So when I ask this question, I normally say, look, legacy is a very big word. And I don't, I believe that I'm a steward of what my predecessors have developed. And my role is to make sure that I lay the strategy for this company to be successful for the next 100 years or more. And in some ways, I think that would be the legacy. For me, I think the journey is as important as the legacy. And I think I've had the privilege of working for one of the best corporations in the world with some of the finest people who've either been my bosses, mentors, peers, and now, my team. And I think for me, that's really what matters.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the very delightful conversation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Parth fellow Indian here as well. I study at the TUM, and I have a question for you. So with this trifecta of your love for hydrogen, the net neutrality and actually net negative emission strategy, and also the way you said that emissions in mobility especially is a very critical thing for success. The trifecta of this is beautifully related to synthetic fuels and e-fuels.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you guys are doing a lot of stuff with gases, syngas that eventually leads up into e-fuels, but what do you think of that as a fuel, as a space in mobility for the future?
So I think synthetic fuels, low carbon fuels have a future. I think at the end of the day, it boils down to timing. In my mind, hydrogen will be part of the fuel mix for mobility, certainly for trucks and potentially for trains and anything where you have a payload. I think synthetic fuels, in fact, synthetic diesels being tried out on some major trucks today. My view is, I don't think you and I are willing to pay a premium for that today. Somebody has to be willing to pay for it. The governments can't subsidize that forever. If you rely on a government to subsidize something, that is a poor choice. So my view is we've got to learn how we make that technology more cost effective. Capital intensity needs to come down. Cost of operations, the total cost of ownership needs to come down. And it needs to be cost competitive such that people will opt for synthetic fuels or hydrogen, not even think about diesel and gasoline. And I think that's where I want to see the world go.
Would you be investing in that as a company?
We're already doing lots of work on that.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Melissa. I'm also doing my master's at TUM. First of all, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts. I especially liked your structured answers, like pointing out all the buckets in 1, 2, 3. And you have spent your entire career at BOC and Linde. You mentioned earlier it was like 27 years, so nearly 3 decades. And I was wondering, what does 3 decades of institutional knowledge give you that no external hire could ever do, and what might it also cost you?
So it's going to be 37 years this year.
37.
So I'm really old. As you can make out. My kids call me old. They call me a dinosaur because they say, how could you work with the same company for 37 years? I mean, you are a dinosaur. I don't feel like that just yet. We'll see. But your question is very good. What I've learned internally within the organization over this period, as I said before, I learn every day. I work in an amazing company that has such brilliant people who are constantly teaching me things all the time. And some of your questions are teaching me things. I really like the very profound question I got around migration. I have to think about that a little bit. But the one, the theme in that, if you grow up in the organization, you live its values, you understand its purpose, and you have clarity on what direction you're moving in with the corporation or the organization. I think that's very important. That's fairly unique. When you come in from the outside, what tends to happen is you're trying to find the fit. You're still trying to figure out, do you understand it? Now, as an insider, I don't have that challenge. And I think that is one of the things you gather. The rest of the information and learning around, products and services and marketing and this, that, and the other, I think those are easily learned. That's not, I think it's the values piece and how the organization operates and how people think and how we move forward is where I think the criticality of the inside learning comes. So I always say to my team as well, we hire for attitude and we train for skills. I want people who are hungry, who are ambitious, who are courageous, who have the spirit of wanting to get things done. Everything else we can teach them. Everything else we can teach them.
Hello, good afternoon. My name's Atharv. I'm also a management student here at TUM. And first of all, thank you very much for your very enlightening insights you provided today. My question refers back to the point that you mentioned earlier, that one needs to be opportunistic, seek out opportunities, and also take initiatives by ourselves. But the question is, how do you actually evaluate the opportunities you come across, and based on what criteria or what aspects you looked for? Because navigating through a lot of opportunities can be misleading, but at the same time, pretty beneficial for you as well.
So I'll answer this a little bit differently and tell you when I have conversations, or if I'm mentoring somebody in the organization and I have conversations with them, and they ask me, look, I want to think about my career. I want to do some career planning. What should I do? How should I do it? I always say, have a vision for where you want to be 5 years from now. For them, I normally say we have a process called the individual development planning process, where we say, look at the next 2 steps. Where do you want to be in the next 2 steps? And then work back from there and do a gap analysis to say, what do I need to be able to get there? So I'd probably say the same thing to you in a different way and say, you need to have a goal for yourself. And you need to have a set of criteria against which you evaluate these different opportunities. I can't give you that criteria because you have to assess what is it that you're looking for. But I would say a structured approach to that goes a long way. And ensuring that you have a clear goal for yourself for the next 5 years, and then against that, a set of criteria saying, this is how I want success to look like 5 years from now, I think is one way to think about it. There are many other ways to think about it. Obviously, you've got lots of peers, right? Having conversations to understand how people are thinking about this particular question will get you inputs that, sometimes you may not yourself, have generated. And obviously, there's lots of reading you can do around this. But at the end of the day, you will distill that. And you have to distill that to be your own. It cannot be what somebody else is thinking or doing.
Hi, I'm Jem, a master's student at TUM. So my question is, I think motivation is an important factor to perform. It's basically simple. How do you motivate other people? It can be your customers, can be your employees or your stakeholders. Do you have any structural methods to do it as a leader? Thank you.
That's a great question. You're absolutely right. Motivation is critical for organizations, for individuals, for teams. It doesn't matter what. I have 3 approaches to motivation: engage, recognize, celebrate. So engagement comes from making sure, and engagement actually comes in different ways, but ensuring there is clarity in what your expectations are, I think goes a long way in motivating people, because they then know they have a clear goal. If you're ambiguous, it doesn't help anybody, right? And I'm giving you this in the professional context now. So if the German team has a goal of going and winning the World Cup, right? That's a very clear goal, right? There is no ambiguity. You either get to the finals or you don't, right? So having clarity in that piece is important on engagement. Also important in engagement is making sure that there is a fair and transparent process. When people know that there is a clear goal and they know that they are going to be assessed or they're going to be supported with, very clear and transparent tools, support systems, resources, the level of engagement you will get from them goes a long way. That's the basis of motivation in some ways, right? So the idea is you set them up for success, you track their progress to make sure they are moving in the right direction, and then you recognize the effort. So that's the first piece, I think, on engagement. The second piece is really making sure that, as I said, you need what I call an operating rhythm. Again, this is from a professional context. You need to make sure people understand that there is an expectation of demonstrating progress regularly against whatever commitments have been made on a continuous basis in a way that is very objective and clear. Transparency and clarity are very important in these processes, and I think it helps people move forward. Once people do achieve a set of milestones, may not be the end goal, but set of milestones, it's important to recognize that. That helps the motivation piece, right? All of us are human beings. Whether we like to say it or not, we all crave positive reinforcement. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, well done, that was really good. You feel good. There's a bit of a dopamine rush. You feel good. That gives you the energy to go and do the next step, right? So unless you recognize even small milestones, you don't get that energy that you need to get, back into the process. And the last piece is celebrate. I think in Germany, we're particularly bad at this, but generally around the world, we're bad at this. Small wins need to be celebrated. A celebration is one of the best ways of motivating people to achieve over and above what they would normally do, to go above the call of duty. A small celebration is what it takes. And take this as a lesson from somebody who spent a lot of years celebrating. It goes, I have a team that is super motivated, super charged up, because they know that not only will I engage with them and give clear views of what expectations are, I will recognize the effort they put in. I will be tough in terms of holding them accountable to the goals, but I will celebrate the wins with them and have fun while we do it. And I think in my mind, as you bring those together, I think forms a really nice way of thinking about motivation. There are many other tools. I'm not saying it's limited to this, but this is how I think about it.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for your valuable time given us. So my name is Shanelka from TUM campus. My question is, how did working in the different countries like Germany, Singapore, India shape your leadership style?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say this, early on in my career, I thought about what leadership meant. And it meant for me solving problems and having the right answers or having all the answers. So for me, a leader was somebody who had all the answers. I realized very quickly that was flawed. That is absolutely wrong. A good leader is one who listens, who processes the information they get, and who has the flexibility or willingness to change their position with the information that they get and the feedback that they get. So a good leader is one who can get feedback, listen to feedback, and act on feedback. And the lesson really came because I worked in so many different countries. It is rare that there is only one solution to something you're trying to solve for or achieve. It is rare. There are usually multiple solutions. And very often I will joke with my friends in Germany saying they only know two colors, black and white. Whereas I come from a country where there is only gray, there is no black and white. And the point I'm making there is, I think living in different cultures, living in different countries, understanding different ways of doing things teaches you very quickly that there are different ways to solve the same problem, or there are different ways in which you can go and address an issue. And I think having the diversity of both thought and input goes a long way in making you successful. So, it has shaped me tremendously, and I'm a lot humbler today than I was 35 years ago, because I realize the diversity that I have in my team makes me a much better leader. And I would say the same to you. Diversity you have in this room makes you much better future leaders. Because if you learn and see and hear and kind of acknowledge what you see around you in terms of diverse points of views, you'll actually make a much better call, much better quality of judgment, decision, action that you take.
I think that is an excellent closing statement. Thank you so much for the wonderful visit.
Pleasure.
Thank you.